My son's teacher texted me we need to talk, then confessed he'd been framing my child for months, so I recorded our conversation. I got a text from my son's teacher that said we need to talk, and my stomach dropped. It was a Tuesday night, and I thought it was about the usual behavior note, but the text came with a time to meet the next morning in his classroom. For 3 months, my son Noah had been coming home upset, getting detention after school, and saying teachers accused him of things he didn't do. He was 9, quiet, loved drawing, and this was the first time we saw him closing down instead of talking. The school sent behavior reports that matched the teacher's notes, and the principal said consistency was key and we should support consequences. Noah's backpack had been searched twice at school with a note that found contraband, though I checked his bag every morning and never saw anything. When I asked the teacher in the first call why the reports kept piling up, he waved it off and said kids test boundaries and Noah needed structure. After the third detention, I went to the classroom to watch recess, and I sat in my car and recorded the entire hour on my phone. I watched teachers come and go, and I watched Noah sit on a bench while other kids played, and then I took the footage inside to the principal and asked for a meeting. The principal smiled and said we would investigate, and 2 weeks later nothing changed except more notes in Noah's planner. Noah stopped wanting to go to school. He asked if we could homeschool for a day and then begged not to tell him about the next detention. I started collecting everything I could. Screenshots of teacher emails, printed behavior logs, Noah's planner with dates, and text messages I'd sent asking for clarification. I made folders of school nurse visits and the note from the counselor who wrote Noah was anxious and withdrawn. One night I found a voice memo Noah had recorded without realizing it, where he said the teacher put a wrapper in his desk and then said he saw it there. I replayed that memo until it made sense. The wrapper mention matched a behavior report about littering in the day Noah came home distraught. I printed the memo, labeled it with the date and time, and stuck it in my evidence folder under the wrapper incident. A week later, the teacher texted me again, this time shorter, asking if I could meet before school in the empty classroom and talk privately. My hands were shaking as I opened the door because we were not on good terms, and I didn't trust him. He looked tired and said he needed to clear the air because this was getting messy and people were talking. I pulled out my phone and hit record before I sat down. I told myself silently, no more surprises, no more being gaslit in a hallway. He started slow, saying Noah had been a problem for months and that he'd tried interventions. Then he said something that made my teeth ache. He admitted he'd been doing things to get proof of misbehavior because he thought that would force Noah to change. He said he planted small things, so he'd have evidence, that he wanted the kid to learn a lesson, that he was tired of explaining to parents why kids acted out. My hand tightened on the phone, and I kept recording. He named specific incidents, dates, and even laughed about how easy it was to slip a candy wrapper into a desk. I asked him why, and he said Noah had been disrespectful to him during class, and that he was tired of Noah's attitude. Tired of my son, he said, like it was petty and normal. He then tried to justify it by saying discipline numbers made him look competent during evaluations, and that kids who didn't respect authority needed a lesson. I stayed quiet to let him keep talking, because every confession was evidence. He admitted to switching papers, to moving a torn sleeve from another kid into Noah's desk, to telling the counselor that Noah had threatened classmates. I asked if he'd told the principal, and he said no because he didn't want paperwork. His voice changed when I asked if he feared consequences now that he had told me. He said he did, then tried to bargain. He offered to apologize publicly if I promised to drop my complaints and not go to the district. He said a public apology would clear everything and heal the class. I told him I had recorded the conversation, and I needed him to say everything on record for the principal and the police. He froze, then laughed nervously and said he thought that would be the end of it. He asked me not to make it worse, said he'd lose his job and his family would suffer. He said he never meant to ruin Noah's life, he just wanted control. I left the classroom with the recording in my pocket and my head buzzing. I went straight to the principal and played the recording in his office and watched his face go from blank to small panic. He excused himself and made phone calls to the superintendent and said he needed a few minutes to figure out protocol. Minutes turned into an hour, and we all sat in the office in silence while the secretary typed emails like she was on autopilot. The principal finally said he had to follow due process, and the teacher was being placed on paid leave pending investigation. He asked me to sign a statement and thanked me for my courage. I asked about Noah's safety, and the principal promised immediate counseling and supervision during classes. At that point, I also texted the recording to my sister, my friend who was a lawyer, and the superintendent because I wanted the district to know the truth would be public if they delayed. The teacher's lawyer called that afternoon and left a terse voicemail demanding the recording be handed over because it was private. I didn't hand it over. I forwarded the voicemail to my lawyer and to the superintendent. The district lawyer called me directly the next morning and said they appreciated my cooperation but advised that any public release should go through them. I asked what that meant, and he said they would handle it to protect both the school and family privacy. I told him to show me the plan in writing and asked for weekly updates on the investigation. A week later, the police came to our house with a short report and asked if they could take the recording as evidence. They said the teacher had admitted to falsifying incident reports and planting evidence and that criminal charges were possible. I let them make a copy of the file, but I kept the original safe on a cloud drive, and on a flash drive, I put in a safe at my parents' house. Then things got messy. The teachers' union sent a notice and posted a statement praising due process and calling the teacher a dedicated educator. Some parents at school posted on a neighborhood group saying the teacher must be under a lot of stress and to wait for the full story. Other parents called me privately to say they were sorry, and they too had seen the teacher act oddly. Noah's counselor reported he was sleeping better but still jumpy when a teacher raised their voice. The district announced an independent audit of all behavior referrals the teacher had written dating back a year. I started getting emails from parents asking for copies of the recording. My phone vibrated nonstop. I agreed to let the district use it in their internal review, and I agreed to share it with the police. But when a local reporter called asking to run an article, the district council told me going public could derail the criminal case. I felt cornered. I wanted everything exposed immediately, but I also didn't want to harm Noah more by dragging him through publicity. We agreed to wait for the criminal investigation to move forward before any press release. Then a week later, something else happened that made me wish I'd posted the recording right away. A parent from my son's class texted me a video she had taken on a school event where the teacher was seen reaching into Noah's desk while the camera panned elsewhere. The timestamp matched a date from the teacher's confession and the rapper incident. I took the video and sent it to the detective and my lawyer and told them we had independent proof. The detective called me in that afternoon and asked if I could come to the station. He said they wanted to hear the full timeline and see the video. When I walked in, the inspector said this changed the case because it showed intent and pattern. They executed a warrant at the teacher's house and found a stack of printed behavior sheets and scrap notes with times and names. They also found a small bag of wrappers and a receipt for candy matching the brand planted in Noah's desk. The detective sat with us and said the teacher would be arrested that day for filing false reports and endangering a minor. The teacher's arrest was quiet, but the impact was loud. The school district released a statement that the teacher was suspended without pay and that they were cooperating with law enforcement. There was an emergency meeting at the school for parents and staff where the superintendent apologized and promised changes. Noah had to sit through an assembly where kids whispered and stared, and he later told me how embarrassed he felt. The school offered him the chance to change classrooms and assigned a permanent aide to supervise transitions. I met with the police and gave a full statement. They wanted everything, every date, every report, every text. I handed over my phone, my recordings, and the video clip from the parent who had filmed at the event. The teacher's bail hearing was public, and I watched him sit in court with his lawyer and his face stripped of class. The charges included falsifying school records and child endangerment. The DA said they intended to pursue the case. Meanwhile, Noah's grades improved because he no longer had false reports shadowing him. His teacher replacement was kind and took time to ask Noah about his favorite subjects and hobbies. Noah started drawing during breaks again and giggled with his friends instead of retreating to the bench. We enrolled him in therapy, and the therapist gave him coping skills and a safe space to name the hurt. At home, we changed routines, so Noah had predictability and control, like packing his own lunch and choosing his outfit to rebuild agency. The school district held a hearing and agreed to change policies about desk searches, behavior report transparency, and parent access to incident documentation. They also mandated body cams for staff in certain situations and required third-party review for repeated referrals. At the board meeting, the teacher's lawyer argued mischaracterization and that he had been acting out of discipline concerns, but parents who had fought the teacher for years spoke up. One mom said her kid had been wrongly accused of stealing and the teacher's notes had been the only reason he was punished. Another dad held up a stack of corrected reports the teacher had filed and said the audit exposed systemic abuse of power. The superintendent resigned in the wake of the scandal, and the district promised an external oversight committee. Meanwhile, the teacher's court case dragged on and the trial date loomed. There were nights I lay awake thinking about how close this could have gone without proof, how Noah could have been labeled a troublemaker for life. There were also nights I replayed the meeting in my head and thanked myself for hitting record. My sister kept saying she couldn't believe I had stayed so calm when he confessed, but the truth was I was too stunned to respond in the moment. Recording him saved us. It gave the police the evidence they needed and forced the district to act. There were costs. We lost friends who sided with the teacher. My parents argued about whether I should have handled it differently. My father said I should have quietly moved Noah to another school and avoided all this public mess. My mother said she was proud I protected her grandson. The family fractures were painful in ways I hadn't expected. The teacher's lawyer tried to use my recording as evidence that I had coerced him, claiming entrapment, but the judge ruled the recording admissible. The DA dropped some charges in plea talks, but the primary charges of falsifying records and endangering a child stayed. The teacher was sentenced to community service, mandatory counseling, and probation, plus he was barred from working with minors. The district settled with several families and set up a fund for counseling for affected students, including Noah. I used some of that money for Noah's therapy and a family session that helped us talk about trust and boundaries without turning it into a guilt match. Noah started to tell jokes again at dinner and asked if he could bring snacks for show and tell. One afternoon he came home with a drawing of our family and handed me the picture with pride, saying he wanted to give it to me for always believing him. I folded that drawing and stuck it in my wallet, and it still sits there. People ask me if I regret recording a teacher or making it public. Sometimes I do wonder if there was another way that would have been less messy. But I also see Noah's smile and hear his laugh, and I know the recording was the only thing that made the truth stick. I still don't know how to feel about all of it, but at least the truth is out.